Okay, I think we're ready. Okay. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the very first session of Spill the Tea, organized by the Scratching Collective. The Scratching Collective is an organization created by emerging artists for emerging artists. The founders, Harris and Grace, have recognized the deep impact the pandemic has had on the performing arts industry, and they also understand the fears many young practitioners are feeling now. So they created Scratching to provide a platform for individuals around the world to share their work and develop their craft. Spill the Tea is a weekly event where guests are invited to have a dialogue session about topics related to the arts industry. And today we're having our very first session of Spill the Tea. This session is going to focus on the mental health of actors in rehearsal spaces and other spaces within the theater industry, and how these spaces can be made safe, and how safe practices can be cultivated to ensure that actors can receive the proper emotional and mental support in an already heightened emotional space. So we have our guests with us here today. So first we have Georgia Andrews. She is a professional actor, maker, and facilitator with a particular interest in intersectional approaches to staging Shakespeare. Next, we have Zainab Gunaydin. She is a creative practitioner and graduating drama applied theater and education student from CSSD, and she is one of the co-directors and co-founders of Bloom Theater. She creates collaborative work that is socially and politically engaged. And finally, we have Mariam Nurhimli. She is currently training at East 15 under the Acting in Community Theater course. Right now, she's exploring the different ways she's been inspired by Islam and how to best translate her takeaways through her practice. So welcome. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Karina, and I'll be hosting the session for today. So I was thinking that we could just get started with everyone sharing their own personal experiences with this topic, so our audience can get some insight into the fundamental problems with how many rehearsals are conducted with regards to mental health. Maybe you can share some of the specific situations in which emotional turmoil arises. So maybe we can start with Mariam, because I know you did some work last year with Harris, collaborating with director Harsh Sharma for a production called Acting Mad. And it was a verbatim piece based off interviews with local actors about actors with mental health issues within the theater industry.
Yep. Right. So in this sense, I'm just going to talk about the interview process, if that's
Yeah, go ahead.
okay, because that was mostly my role in this. In terms of creating a safe space for the interviewers and interviewees, basically Harris and I interviewed actors who were willing to step forward and share their experiences with mental health, being an actor in the industry. So that was honestly very tricky because Harris and I were fresh out of school. We were essentially nobodies, and interviewing these experienced actors was very daunting for us. But I also realized it was daunting for them because they were essentially sharing these very personal stories with strangers. And Harris and I tried very hard to make sure that we came in to the interviews with clear and structured questions, and we vetted through these questions with the director to make sure that these questions were legitimate and productive, and they weren't straying too far from the topic. Honestly, we interviewed around 20 plus people, and we sort of learned as we went along in terms of how to manage the emotions and how to better understand body language. And it was really a work in progress. We didn't start knowing exactly how to do this, but I think one thing Harris and I always kept in mind was how do we best cater to the interviewee and make them feel comfortable and safe by constantly checking in and listening to what they were comfortable sharing with. And we emphasized on, again, what they wanted to share. And yeah, that was the process.
I'm just curious, what did you find that you learned from interviewing them and learn about how actors deal with their mental health in the rehearsal room?
So to answer your first bit, I learned that people are actually very willing to share their experiences if there's someone who's willing to listen. So it's sort of like a give and take. In terms of how these actors sort of manage themselves in the rehearsal space, it's sort of, there's a spectrum in terms of how well they're able to cope. Some of the stories include actors having to leave the space and coming back. Some of them dealt with it in such a way where, okay, the moment I enter the rehearsal room, all my problems will be left at the door, and I'm going to enter this with a professional mindset and not bring these issues in. But it's hard to do that sometimes when you are very overwhelmed by your emotions and what you're going through. So there are times when actors aren't able to handle it well. And what was important at that point is to have a listening director, or the facilitator who's running the workshop, for example. What I realize is needed is someone who's listening and who can actually sense that something is not right. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Maybe we can move on to Zainab.
Yeah, so I don't think I have a real stickler of a memory or a stickler of an experience. I think it's more about when, as a co-director and a co-creator, I've recently just done a show where we did like a schools tour, and it was a verbatim piece all about hopes and dreams of young children targeted at 8 to 12-year-olds. And we took that to a primary school and a local library, and we also performed it in-house to invited youth theatre audiences. And I just think through the process of that, it wasn't necessarily, I don't think we intentionally spoke about safe space and that sort of thing. It was more making sure that the actors were comfortable with us, and they knew that they were co-creators with us, and that it was a collaborative space. But like Mariam said, I think, yeah, it's really important to have a person, or if all of you are in the room that are directors, are constantly, being aware of your actors and making sure that they're, right in the room, because you can quite easily tell when someone's not feeling it today, or someone, might have had a situation at home, or there might be a thing in the room that's quite uncomfortable, and, you've got to be on your feet and quickly change that. It's something that you've got to be aware of.
Yeah, definitely. I've actually experienced that quite a bit as an assistant director. And now, Georgia, you did a really great TED Talk on this topic. I watched it and I really enjoyed it. So perhaps you can expound your points.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting because I've done a lot of research on the topic, and I've been really lucky because the 3 years that I've been sort of consistently working in professional rehearsal rooms, I haven't had a negative experience. But I find it's in training environments that these things can happen most easily. Because I think there's a sense that, and quite rightly, that you have to be resilient and emotionally available and open to be a performer, and indeed you do. But I think we can't avoid talking about mental health and safe spaces without also talking about abuses of power. And I mean, not just the high profile cases of Harvey Weinstein, who I didn't want to mention because I didn't want to give his name airtime, but people like him, but also on a smaller scale, like if that's happening in a regional or in independent or in small scale training or schools or environments or productions, it isn't policed in the same way. And it takes a lot for people to come forward. I think the mental health of a lot of performers, even if they come into that space without an existing mental health condition, can be really severely affected by the idea that in order to be good, in order to be committed and successful, you should give them access to everything about you. And you should never say no. I was told once in the past by a professional that if I said no to a director, whatever they asked, I would be, told never to work again. And like it would be spread around that I was bad to work with. And since that happening, I've been consistently employed, invited back by employers. It's never been a problem. But the fact that that mindset exists at like the very top of the industry, like a very experienced director gets to say that to impressionable students, I think is really, really problematic.
Yeah, for sure. There seems to be this conflict between product and process. So like valuing efficiency and merit versus the health and well-being of the team and the people involved. Do you think this conflict is like purely fabricated, just a way for us to justify mental well-being as a trade-off to achieve artistic and economic success, and like how might both of these things happen at the same time?
I personally, I think it's constructed in a way, and I think there's this perception in the wider industry that like, oh, suddenly everyone wants to be safe, like suddenly there's all these mental health conflicts, and it's not. They've always been there, and right, I've been doing some research on Marilyn Monroe, of all people, for a living history project, and right back in her time, well before that, there's been extreme misogyny, extreme racism, extreme classism going on throughout the industry, and of course that is affecting people's mental health. But because it hasn't been talked about till now, I think there is an old guard of people that are resistant to positive change. And like for me, a safe space isn't somewhere where you can't be bold, and it isn't somewhere where you can't take risks. It's a space where every person on that contract, on that job, in that room is free to be bold and take risks because they're not at risk of violence. And like by violence, I don't just mean like punched in the face or assaulted in any way. It's like the violence of microaggressions, the violence of being the only person of your identity represented in the room. Like those are acts of violence as well.
Zainab and Mariam, do you guys have anything to add on to that?
A thought just came into my mind when you were talking about being the only one representing your like identity group. And I've never actually, I mean, I felt it before. I felt not necessarily isolated, but sort of alone in that. And I think it falls on the director, or again, the facilitator, to not only start the workshop well or rehearsal well, but also end it well, such that, everyone throughout the process feels acknowledged and welcomed. So yeah, just to add on that.
Yeah, and I think a successful process 9 times out of 10 will create a successful product, because all the actors and all the creators are in it, and they really truly believe in whatever project or whatever piece they're working on, and that will then create a successful product.
Yeah, for sure. I think we've like kind of moved to talking about now what a safe space is and what it looks like. One question we receive from the audience asks if you truly believe that there is a safe space in theater and in life in general. And I think that kind of links to the question of what exactly is a safe space? What does it mean to you emotionally, physically? What are the components? Who are the stakeholders? So maybe we can cover that. Georgia, would you like to start?
Okay, yeah, I think it's a difficult question. Like for me, it is simpler than people think, but also for me, I'm not sure it exists yet. There are spaces that I've felt completely safe at work, and that's because of privileges I've had, like as much as anything. At the same time, I think there's a strong argumentative line that I've heard, certainly in training, from my colleagues, where people are like, there will never be such thing as a safe space, and it's going to be too safe and people are going to be inhibited. And I just think that is a problem for the far future. Like at the moment, it's far more, just looking at my notes, like it's very unlikely that we're going to get to a point where the space is trying to be so safe that people can't express themselves fully, because at the moment we're still dealing with the fact that maybe not the majority, but a vast amount of spaces are like perilously unsafe, in the sense of like physical sexual harassment, or in the sense of casting that is problematic in various ways, or is perpetuating kind of dynasties and not allowing people in who don't come from, for example, a theatre background or a financially very well-off background. I think it's very like, it's like a simple thing really. Like it may be an ideal that we can never reach, but it's something we should all strive towards before we start going, it's going to be too safe and we're going to be inhibited. I think a safe space is one that has freedom of expression, as long as you're not harming another human being. Sorry,
Yeah,
rambly there.
No, you brought up really great points. Zainab, do you have anything to add on?
Controversial, but I don't like the phrase safe space. I think that in itself creates problems. From the experiences that I've had, the times that directors have gone, this is a safe space, hasn't been a safe space and hasn't made the performers and the creatives comfortable. I think it's a thing of, if the creatives themselves plan a comforting, welcoming environment, that then makes their actors feel space. You don't have to acknowledge that it's a safe space. You don't have to acknowledge that we're here for you or anything like that. I think it comes with, if you make it a welcoming environment, it emphasizes a safe space. And I think you very much, as a person, as any person, you can read people. And I think you can read, if your participants are having a good time, then you've done it well. And if you haven't, you go back to the drawing board, and the next day you plan and you go, right, well, this, clearly they weren't that comfortable, and you ask for feedback. I think every session that I did whilst creating our piece, we had feedback at the end of the session straight away, and we also fed back at the beginning of the next session on the previous session, and then what's going to happen next. And I think it's those sorts of things that put in place a safe space or a safe environment without necessarily acknowledging that it's a safe space.
So sorry to jump in again, and I really didn't want to be all interrupty, but like what you just said, I think it's so true. It's the number of spaces I've been in where they've been like, they slap the label on, we're a safe space, and then they think because they've said that anything that happens in there is just being free with expression and all this. And like I've been in a space like that where, because they've got a sign on the door saying we are safe, they will let anything happen. And like that sounds in a way creatively a dream. Anything could happen, but it's like, not when that is a crime, or not when that is oppressive behaviour. I don't know how to say it without referencing the specific comments that were made, but it was like, for example, comments relating to genocide and relating to people's personal family history in a really offensive and racist way in this case, were happening in a space that, because it was labelled safe, couldn't possibly do any wrong. And I think you're spot on there, Zainab.
Yeah, just to add on, I went for this workshop recently, and it labelled itself as a safe space. And entering the workshop, I honestly felt a bit stressed going into it, because I had an expectation of what the workshop was supposed to be like. And in that, I wasn't able to fully be myself, because I felt like, okay, this is a safe space, I have to be a certain way. Not that this is no one's fault really, but this is sort of just my own thought process of how I should be. And in that ironically inhibits myself. And yes. So
Yeah. Mariam, you've had experience both in Singapore and in the UK. So I'm wondering if you've spotted any similarities or differences, or we're all just humans, so is it all kind of the same?
I think that's a hard thing to answer, because I think I would say the main difference would be the people I'm surrounded with, in terms of Singaporean classmates, or classmates in East 15. I do have a teacher from Singapore who reminds me of a teacher I had in East 15, and they were similar in that both of them were very receptive and welcoming and listening yet again. They had the same vibration, and I found that very fascinating, because they're two completely different people, but they sort of still managed to make me feel safe. And that aside, I think I generally feel safer in East 15 just because I think it's the nature of the work we do. We do delve deeper into, for example, like movement or Stanislavski. We go deeper into the human psyche, and because we go in deeper, I feel the setup for that there's been much more consideration in terms of how teachers are able to handle it. So I think, to be fair, both are they do try to be safe, but I just feel safer in uni, and I think it's just because of the work we do. Yeah.
One question I wanted to ask you guys, because I go to a liberal arts college, so I've never had the experience of being in a drama institution or in like an educational institution like that. I was wondering if you guys in your classes explicitly engage with this as a discussion, and I talk about this when thinking about like how you might go about directing something, how you can go about setting up your rehearsal rooms and things like that. Are there like ongoing dialogues in your classes?
Yeah, kind of. I think particularly on the course that I'm on, the Drama Applied Theatre and Education course, first year is mainly for those discussions. Second and third year, you put those discussions into practice. I personally would say some of those discussions are really great, and your peers and really challenge you, and you really open your mind and you think and you go, wow, I didn't think about it like that way. Maybe I should try it another way. But then there's times where you think that dialogue actually becomes an unsafe space because you overthink it dramatically, and it's every single movement and every single plan and activity is unpicked to the finest detail, that sometimes you go, whoa, can I actually even do this? Can I be in this industry? Because if I've got to think about it in every minute detail like this every time, like, how can I plan for every situation? There's no possibility that you can ever plan for an unexpected situation in a rehearsal room or in a workshop. That's just not possible. So it's a bit of both. I think some dialogues are really great, and others I come out and I feel so overwhelmed and I have to remind myself that I can do this. And I think second and third year, you really put that into practice and you go, it's trial and error. You're by yourself, you're with a group. I was in a foreign country, I went to New York, and we were in a foreign country, no tutors, nothing, running workshops, and it was just trial and error. And I think that's the best way to learn, and that's the best way to kind of use your intuition and find what feels right for you in the rehearsal room.
Mariam, what about you? Especially, I would also like to hear the differences between your education here in Singapore and then back in the UK.
To be honest, when it comes to this topic, we haven't really covered it officially in the first year, because first year is mostly acting training. I feel like we do that the second year. But in terms of whether I've had discussions about this with my friends, I've mostly explored this topic by watching my teachers and how they manage classes, and then I sort of just reflect on it with my friend. But it was never like let's talk about how safe this was. It was more of like they did something that was really nice actually, and that got us thinking about how these teachers just naturally and quietly support us in their own way, and I found it so beautiful actually. Just a funny story. We had movement class one day, we were supposed to have it, but for some reason everyone was just really down, and I think it was because of the events leading up to that day. But when the movement teacher came in, she immediately sensed there was this weird energy, and she was like, okay guys, do you want to go to the beach? And we all just went to the beach, and we sort of just all lay together on the sand, and I think that was more effective than actually going through with class. And so yeah, it's mostly by watching how my tutors handle these situations that we explore how safe spaces can be built. Yeah.
Georgia, what about you?
Not much to add, really. I think something that both Mariam and Zainab just expressed really beautifully was the fact that when when the safe space, or whatever you want to call it, is, or the rehearsal, even just the rehearsal room is functioning best, you don't need to have those conversations, or you've had them in the past, but in practice, when you're not thinking about it, you're able to just be doing and engaging and creating, because you've laid the groundworks, for example, by employing teachers like the one Mariam described that are accountable, and they learn through trial and error, and if they have an error, they hold themselves accountable. Like it sounds like you were doing in New York, Zainab, like the idea that it's absolutely fine to make mistakes, and it's sometimes a mistake might affect another human being, but as long as you step back and you sit in that and you're like, I've done this, because it happens to us all. I think, like we were saying before, with power comes accountability, and where the industry is going wrong a little bit in some cases, and in some high profile cases, is that those in power don't have accountability, or the dynamic between the director and actors, or students and educators, doesn't have accountability, and that's when things go wrong. I think it's not necessarily, you could be in a space where you've never spoken about it being safe and you've never had to analyze anything like that, but because of the group of people in the room and the training or the empathy of the people running the room, the conversation doesn't need to be had, because everyone in there is completely comfortable, and in a room where everyone's comfortable, you can play, and that's what it's about.
Yeah, for sure. I think one thing I picked up on is this idea of this unfair power dynamic, which allows people to exploit the emotional state of actors because of the position that they're in within the rehearsal or within the workshop or wherever it is. Yeah, so I was just wondering, what kind of avenues for feedback have you encountered to kind of combat this, and what do you wish existed? Yeah.
I'll go in.
Yeah.
I think in terms of feedback sessions that I've led, it's about being honest, and I think there was one session that really picks out where myself and my co-directors, we all didn't have the right vision. We all had different visions on this one scene that we were trying to work on, and I think the whole rehearsal just went to pieces, and I think then the actors felt that too. And I think we got to the checkout, or the end bit, and I think us as directors went, I'm really sorry that this session isn't right, hasn't been right. We hold our hands up. We're going to go away tomorrow. We're going to plan, and we're going to come back with a better vision, because actually there's 4 directors in Bloom, and that's a lot sometimes. It was created as a university piece that we're now going to take out of uni, but 4 directors to start with is a lot. Something that you don't really see in the industry, in the real world outside of uni. And I think it was, like Georgia said, we were accountable, and we held our hands up and we said, we're really sorry, guys. We planned this session. It hasn't gone how we planned. Do you have any feedback for us? Is there anything you'd like us to work on? And they gave us a few things. We went away. We spent the morning planning. We came back in the evening, and we had a great session. And it almost, then the rest of the process was almost a dream. Like, there were some few stressful points, as there always are as you get close to the performance, but I think it's, like Georgia said, you hold yourself accountable, and I think they learn from your mistakes as much as you learn from them. Like, by watching people mess up, you learn from that. Another quick thing, like a tutor in our first year, he was a director. He directed our first big performance, and he messed up. And it took him till 3rd year to admit to us that, he learned a lot from that, because actually he did mess up. And I think if it takes them 2-3 years and that's what it is, at least they've learned something. And I think, watching a director, you learn from them too. So yeah, it's all about accountability, as Georgia said.
Yeah, like this active process of reflection, that's very important.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Just to expand on your point of avenues of feedback, I found what was helpful is sometimes having an external person to the process. So not necessarily the creative, but a stage manager or production manager. Having that middleman, and actors having the option to approach this middleman and with their issues or problems. I think that is helpful in creating a conducive space. Personally, I think it's always better to confront the person, or talk to the person straight on, just so you're like on the same wavelength. But we don't always have that option, and we don't always feel confident enough to do that. So in that, I think it's nice to have a middleman. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great. So we are almost out of time, but I did want to ask this question about how, I think maybe Georgia, you can start off answering this, because you kind of brought this up in your TED Talk. I wanted to ask, like, how we can continue to create emotionally evocative performances without having to capitalize and exploit actors with existing, pre-existing mental health issues.
It's interesting, because I think my opinions on this have come along a lot since I did my TED Talk. They're largely the same, in that there is no reason and no excuse to exploit yourself as an actor in the room to be good, to be seen as good, or to be good. Like, you can feel, I've done a lot of work with Shakespeare and with voice, and trained with some fantastic practitioners, and all the kind of voice training I've done has been based on Linklater, and that's Kirsten Linklater and Patsy Rodenberg, and they talk about how you come to the room and you've already got all you need within you, and that is your body of experience, but it's also literally your body, which is what feels those experiences. There's almost no need to dig back and to consciously think about that time you were sad, because that time is within you, and when you're speaking the words, maybe something from it will come out, but that isn't, you don't need to do it consciously. I was very against like Stanislavski and training until I returned to it again at Central, and the way they handled it at Central, it was just totally unproblematic. It was still dealing with emotional memory and sense memory and things like that, but it was just approached in a professional manner, that we were doing it as professionals, and if anything came up or happened, you would just feel completely fine in that. I've been doing some research on Lee Strasberg and his methods of training recently, just because I was so close to them. I was kind of like, well, this is a time that I could learn more and see if it is what I assumed. And actually, he was known to be really like military about training, and like you turn up early and on time, and like, and so people thought that he was one of those very domineering directors. But actually, he worked with his wife very closely, and she was always there in the space. There wasn't a sense that he was exploiting actors in the kind of traditional older male director power dynamic. He was really clear that acting wasn't therapy, and there are some letters that exist that he sent to actors saying, I really encourage you to explore that outside the space, and maybe only come back to it in your work when you're ready to do so in a few years. And I think that really exemplifies how even the method, which is considered really like introspective and considered actually really unsafe, and I think that is partially because there are mainstream Hollywood actors that do it in a really unsafe way, that it was not what Stanislavski intended. That it can all be done. You can work from emotion safely, but there are also ways where you don't even have to work through emotion, and you can still access truth in performance.
Yeah, definitely. It's also, as much as it is like a shared responsibility, I think we also have a personal responsibility to keep our own selves safe.
Yeah. If you know that there's something you are not ready to deal with, like if you there's a lot of stories about Hamlet, about like actors taking on Hamlet, which is a play about someone whose father passes away, when that's just happened to them, and sometimes they can't handle it, and it's like there is a level of self-responsibility of, maybe I'm not ready to do this, or maybe I can go and work on it outside the room, and then when I get into the room I'm able to look at it. But yeah.
Great. Thank you guys so much. I think we have to wrap the conversation up here. I learned a lot from this. I think, we just have to keep engaging in open conversations, and like the idea of a safe space is a continuous, as you guys have said, a continuous process of trial and error, and an ideal that we have to keep reaching for, and to have these kind of conversations about. So for everyone else watching, we will be kind of consolidating all of these points in text form, and we'll be posting it as like infographics or text on our Instagram, so be sure to check that out. So follow us on social media to see that, and to keep up with all of the other events that the Scratching Collective is organizing. Be sure to subscribe to the Scratching YouTube channel, and to check out the next few sessions of Spill the Tea. We're having one next week hosted by Benito. So keep a lookout for that. And I want to thank our panelists so much. Thank you, Zainab. Thank you, Georgia. Thanks, Mariam. I had a great session and great talk. Thank you, guys.
Thank you all.
Thank you.